Welcome to Champagne Problems. We are your hosts, Robbie Shaw and Patrick Balsley. Thank you for joining us on this journey as we explore our mental health, well-being, performance, and longevity, and how our relationships with alcohol can influence each. No shame, no labeling, no judgment, just curiosity. Hello again, loyal listeners, and welcome to anyone here for the first time. I'm very excited for today's guest, as the topic we will be covering is something that over 80% of people experience in their lives, and that is imposter syndrome. Today we're speaking with Dr. Valerie Young. Dr. Young is considered to be the world's foremost expert on impostor syndrome and is the co-founder of the Impostor Syndrome Institute. Dr. Young has spent the last 40 years of her life immersed in this research, study, and treatment, and we get to pick her brain today. Let's go to Dr. Young. Dr. Valerie Young, welcome to Champagne Problems.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks, Robbie.
Of course, we're thrilled as well to have you on. Just as a kind of an intro from our part, you know, I've battled imposter syndrome for years. I'm sure you hear that all the time. I'm not sure I knew quite what it was, but as I dig in, I can understand that the symptoms or the characteristics that I was dealing with on various transitions in my life certainly apply to what I've found is defined as imposter syndrome. My wife is a physician and has done the same thing, you know, residency, fellowship, first job, second job. And each time in those transitions, it's like, I've got everybody duped, you know, the whole thing. So I'm very excited to talk about this. We've learned about it organically, but I'm really excited to hear more formally what it is and all you've spent your life researching and doing. We want to get to know you real quick. We're going to ask some rapid fire questions. What was your first live music concert and where was it?
Oh, God. God, I want to say at Tanglewood, maybe Sly and the Family Stone, who showed up like 3 hours late, and it was $10 a ticket or $5, which was like outrageous back then.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe Taj Mahal, he's from our area.
Love it. Great answer.
What can make you angry like nothing else?
Uninformed people.
Uninformed people. Love it.
I can roll with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dogs or cats?
Oh, dogs.
Yeah. Obviously.
I pretend to like cats. No offense to the cat owners, but I'm a dog person.
We got plenty of cat people listening.
Yeah, that's right. Weirdos.
What's your favorite scenic view? Out my back window. I have a beautiful view of the Mount Tom range. If there was still skiing there used to be nighttime skiing when I was growing up, I could watch them skiing down the hill with my binoculars.
Oh, wow.
Nice. That's cool.
Very cool. So you're where you grew up right now?
I'm in that general area. It's kind of known as Pioneer Valley, the Connecticut River Valley. Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Nice.
Wow. All right, last question. If you could know the answer to any question, what would you ask?
It would have to be like, what's next?
Yeah.
Like, what's on the other side?
That's right. Common answer. I think we all want to know that. Okay, so let's dive in. Thank you for playing along with the rapid fire. So we kind of just touched on this a little bit, but tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, maybe college, you know, early education, and what led you to where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I did grow up in this area. I consider myself a kind of working class New England Yankee, if you will, which has a different meaning in the North. And
it does.
It's unrelated. Let me put it. It's unrelated to the Civil War. It's just kind of, you know, folks who originally came from Britain, I guess. I don't know, you know, and Quebec, a lot of immigrants who came down from Quebec. You know, that's kind of my background, emphasis on the working class side of things. So I was one of the first generations in my family to go to college. I went to the University of Massachusetts. It would have never occurred to me in a million years to even apply to like an Ivy League school. It's just out of my frame of reference and my family's frame of reference. Not that I would have gotten in, I don't know. But while I was going to school, my mom was also working there as a second shift custodian. My uncle was a custodian there. My aunt was a secretary in the athletic department. So that's, you know, it's kind of my orientation.
Oh, wow.
I had no expectations to go into graduate school. I didn't even know what graduate school was. I really stumbled into it and ended up in this doctoral program following in someone else's shoes who I really admired. Once I was in this doctoral program, somebody brought in a paper by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes called The Imposter Phenomenon Amongst High Achieving Women, and started describing how all these bright, capable, competent, I mean, they thought it was women because that's who Clance and Imes were working with at the time. And it felt like they were fooling folks. They were going to be found out. And I just was like nodding my head like a bobblehead doll. Like, oh my God, that's me. And I say that because it shifted what I was going to be researching. It completely shifted my focus. I wanted to understand, because I identified so strongly, like where is this coming from and how does this work? So that's what my research essentially was on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent 7 years in a Fortune 200 company. So I'm not an academic. I want to be clear. I'm not a psychologist either. I'm an educator. So I took what I found, Robbie and Patrick, from my research, and I immediately turned it into, a fancy term would be an educational intervention, as opposed to like a therapeutic intervention. But basically, I created an intensive 1-day interactive workshop to really apply what I was learning and help folks kind of unlearn imposter syndrome.
I love that. Can we kind of unpack that a little bit? And can you tell us a little bit about what you teach through that curriculum and what the dynamics or underlying dynamics of what would present as imposter syndrome look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, back in the day, it was a full day program. Over the years, everyone wants MIC training.
Sure.
Like, give us advanced leadership, and I got 45 minutes. Right?
Right.
So do we. We like that too.
So it was essentially an opportunity for, instead of someone standing up and either lecturing someone or someone going to therapy and being at, well, how does that make you feel? And tell me about your family, which is not that that's not unimportant, but it was a way for people collectively to be together in a room who share this common experience, to get a common definition, what it is, what it's not, start to explore, in some cases, what are the family messages that you might have gotten growing up that might have led you to have imposter feelings later in life? What are some of the societal sources, for example? But one of the key exercises I would do with people is have them on their own, and then in a group, come up with the imposter rule book. In other words, if somebody walked in and said, "What are you doing?" and we said, "Oh, we're talking about imposter syndrome," and they said, "What's that?" We go, "Oh, here's the rule book. If you think like this, you can feel like an imposter." So it's, in other words, if I was really intelligent, capable, competent, I should, or I'd never, or I'd always. Right? I'd always be confident. I'd always know the answer. I should never make a mistake. I'd understand things before I started out. This wouldn't be so hard. And people would do it on their own, and then they'd share it in a group, and we would literally fill the walls with flip charts full of these unrealistic, unsustainable rules. And once you see them in writing, you're like, yeah, no human on the planet could ever do these, right? Consistently.
Right.
That's what we're holding ourselves to. So that would be an example of what we would do. Just quickly, there's a process called the trumpet process that this guy, Gerald Weinstein, had pioneered, which is to take a dysfunctional pattern, like to understand it more deeply, because these are unconscious patterns. Understand, like, what are the situations where imposter feelings come up? What are the behavior? In other words, whenever I'm in a situation where I'm on a podcast, right? I'm in a room with people more senior than me, or more educated than me, or more experienced than me, or somebody asks me a question, or I'm in my performance review, or I get a promotion. I usually experience feelings of what the negative voice in my head starts saying. And what I typically do is X. So to help them tease out what's happening as a pattern, what are they getting out of it, and what is it costing them? Sure. So these are like individual and group exercises to understand on a deeper level.
Got it. My mind is it just races over this topic. But I'm going to try to organize my questions and maybe start kind of more in the elementary phase of more kind of formal definition of imposter syndrome. Let's just do that for our listeners to start, and then we can start kind of breaking it down a little bit, because I personally have a lot of questions.
Well, I was gonna say, it's important that we're doing that, Robbie, because people mistake, they think it's just any normal anxiety before a job interview, like, oh, you got imposter syndrome, or it must be imposter Like, no, maybe you're just nervous because you're going to make a big presentation. Like
Yeah.
Really, to me, there's kind of three elements to this imposter experience, if you will, right? It's this kind of core belief, consciously or unconsciously, that deep down, I'm really not as intelligent, capable, competent, talented, qualified as everyone else seems to think that I am. Number two, we have these feelings despite concrete evidence, sometimes in some people's cases, overwhelming, compelling evidence to the contrary that of our past achievements or our current abilities. And third is the result is we're left with this fear that sooner or later we're going to be found out. That the truth in our mind, the truth is going to be revealed and we'll be found to be a fraud.
One quick question on that. So is there a time frame associated with it? In the sense that, like you said, often it could be somewhat preliminary and you are start doing something new where you actually don't know as well as, other people. And so you have these thoughts, oh, I wish I could be more equipped for this. But then over time in doing so and gaining more experience, that feeling, that self-talk, that subconscious idea starts to diminish. I mean, is that kind of how it can work?
It certainly can. Or let me offer you an alternative. To me, the opposite of imposter syndrome isn't being an arrogant, smartest guy in the room, narcissistic jerk. That's how it's usually framed, right? You have a choice. You can be this guy right over here, or you can, I don't want to say guy, but you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
Smart, this thinks they know everything. Irrational self-confidence syndrome.
Ego.
Or you can feel like an imposter. And I would invite your listeners to consider a third option, which is to become a humble realist. A humble realist goes into a new situation or they start a new business or whatever it might be. They expect a certain amount of anxiety and fear and unknowing going in. So they're not judging themselves as an imposter because this isn't surprising to them. They look at it like, of course I don't know everything. I've never done this before. How would I know? It's my first podcast, right? If you're starting a podcast, or I've never had my art in a gallery, or I've never been a medical student before, right? So I'm bombarded, overwhelmed with training and information in medical school. Medical culture is all about shaming residents for not knowing things, shaming students. So, it's a difference between going, well, it's not about me. I am in this culture that I didn't know I was signing up for, but this is the culture I am. And of course, I feel this way under the circumstances. Does that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And those three kind of distinct criteria that you just mentioned to meet the definition of imposter syndrome, is there any flexibility there, or is it like, do those three things have to be presenting themselves in order for you to be considered to have imposter syndrome?
In my view, they do. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a psychologist,
but
yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's just
anxiety.
It's like normal, what I would consider. And for some people it's extreme, right? Anxiety. And that's an issue, clearly. But I do think the short answer is yes. I think they have to be operating.
Well, and I mean, we could go into the longer answer because there is, as I'm sure you're going to be able to educate us on, root causes. And there, like you said, there's the kind of how we were brought up and some of the expectations that were, put on us and now we hold. And so they're so irrational, whether it's inside the household or in society. So let's talk kind of root causes of these things. Is imposter syndrome kind of in that same light?
Yes and no. And let me tell you what I mean by that, because I'm well aware of the therapeutic model. I was recently asked to contribute to a book being put out by the APA. I'm the only non-psychologist, I'm the only non-clinician, and the only non-academic, which is scary as hell to write that book.
I know feeling like an imposter.
Well, and I know who I'm speaking. I know the audience I'm speaking to. I got as I described it, my non-peer review.
Yeah, there you go.
After that, but I know from a clinician point of view that, in my experience, there's a lot of focus on family messages and expectations, and I think it's important. And I don't think it's the only thing, and we can talk about that in a minute. But it is important. So I don't want to diminish that at all. You know, if you were the kid who was came home with 4 A's and 1 B, and your family's only response is, okay, Robbie, right? What's that B doing there, right?
You just described my family, Dr. Young.
Somebody said to me, she's an Indian American. She said the message she got in her family is if you're not outstanding, don't come home.
Right.
Nope.
Right. Second place is the first loser.
no pressure. You know.
Exactly. You know, so the point that I make to folks is, you know, I mean, and your parents are trying to do the best they can, right? There's lots of reasons they might have pushed you to excel. Maybe they're highly educated and they want you to follow in their footsteps. Or if you have an immigrant experience, you know, education is seen as the path to success for the child and perhaps the survival of the family. You know, in a lot of Black families, the message is you have to be better, right? You have to be better, so you have to get these grades. But when you're a kid, none of these reasons matter, because for you, praise is like oxygen. And then other kids might have come home and gotten very good grades and gotten no praise at all. And it's not because their parents are bad, mean, evil parents. Like maybe they didn't get it growing up, so they don't know how to give it. Maybe there was another kid struggling academically and they don't want to make little Billy feels bad by praising one kid more than the others. Maybe they don't value education. Maybe they define success as going into the military or the family business or producing some grandchildren or, you know, whatever that definition is. They don't value education. I mean, there's many, many reasons why that might happen. But if you're a kid, none of that matters because praise is like oxygen. And then some kids got too much oxygen. Right? Where they were told everything they did was remarkable. And then they grow up and they slam into stuff where they're not remarkable and they don't quite know what to do with that. Or sometimes people use the example of, it's interesting to have this conversation with people in the mental health field. But one of the frameworks, I think Pauline Clance, who coined one of the co-coiners of the term imposter phenomena, talked about kind of family myths and labels, where one kid is designated, or let me back up, let me say it a different way. Kids get labeled early on. So they might be like the funny one, the athletic one, the shy one, the bad one, and then there's usually the smart one. And if you didn't get to be the smart one, you might spend your whole life trying to get your parents to notice you. Hey, look at me, I went to MIT. Hey, I'm a clinician. Hey, I got a podcast, check me out. And it's like, and I always tell people, here's the thing, they pick the smart one, it's not you. Game over. Like, I just saved you a lot of time and money in therapy right there, right?
Not you.
It's not you. And then, you know, and then the kid is the smart one. That could be a tremendous amount of pressure to maintain, you know, that status of being the smart one. So I really encourage people to look at how is success defined in my family? Have I exceeded that family expectation? Have I fallen short? I mean, either one will send you into therapy.
Right.
In my view. So I think it's very, very important. My concern is I see people getting stuck there. People have emailed me or come up to me after a talk and said, I spent 4 years in therapy, like looking for that wound, like trying to find that like core pivotal moment or experience in my childhood that is the source of all imposter feelings. And they're like, I had a really good child. Like they can't think of anything. And I guess I'm just like, you know, I don't think it's not one thing, it's your mother, right? We don't exist in a vacuum. So for some people, it might have far more to do with being in medical school and medical culture, or being an academic, or being in a creative field where you're being judged by subjective standards, or you're the first indigenous person to be the regional manager in your company. I mean, there's other reasons, there's societal sources, occupational sources, situational sources, that I think we have to look at the whole picture.
So it's coming from both sides. So it's like a little bit of history and then the soup that you're currently baking in.
Yeah.
Can some of this stem from current mental health issues such as depression and anxiety that is showing up in the feelings of being a fraud?
Yeah, there's a lot of research that does show there is a link between anxiety and depression and imposter feelings. That's not the case for everyone, but unsurprisingly, you know, there is for many people a connection. Let me tell you what I found in my early research, and I continue to maintain today, is kind of the core source, meaning if all those other factors went away tomorrow, but this remained intact, nothing would change. And to me, the core source is our unrealistic, unsustainable expectations about what it means to be competent, an unhealthy response to failure, mistake, constructive criticism, setbacks, and this unrealistic idea that if I was really competent, I'd feel confident 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's to understand that regardless of where it came from, let's just set that over here, that this is an individual experience around imposter syndrome. It's also a collective mindset of people who feel like imposters.
Yeah.
And I say
Got
that
it.
just it can be incredibly liberating for someone to go, wait a minute, there's a name for this.
Yeah.
Other people feel that way too. That alone can be liberating. Understanding that there's a collective thinking going on that is common to folks with imposter feeling, I think can also be liberating, because then there's a solution.
Sure.
Hmm.
Is there let me back up a little bit. I had another question about kind of the nurture side of things and the developmental side and what could lead to some of these feelings. Do you see, or have you kind of identified over your years of experience and research that there's like that there is like and you may have answered this question already, but like either a family dynamic that stands out like way more than others that are going to lead to like more present symptomology of this? Like, is there something? Is there like one or two things that you've identified that are going to increase the probability of somebody experiencing this more than anything else, like by far, or is it a combination of? And I'll let you answer this, but one of the things that rang true to me was that the kid that gets all the praise that doesn't really deserve it, and then coming up against something that would really, really challenge him later on in life without having that like true competency or like real confidence. But is there something that's more than the rest?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you with confidence, because I'm not an academic.
Yeah.
I know there's research on birth order,
Okay.
alcoholism, narcissistic, one parent, both parent,
Sure.
so there's a number of variables that have been looked at trying to find what is that kind of common denominator. And in my understanding, I can check with Kevin Coakley at the University of Michigan. Um, I don't think there's this one thing
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's been found.
Okay.
And is there a push to include imposter syndrome in some sort of DSM type resource?
Yeah, Dr. Coakley was in one of the many people on a paper that looked at 60 research papers that met certain criteria, and they put it into a grid. That might be very interesting for you, Robbie, to take a look at, because it puts it into a grid. Here's the subjects, here's what they were focusing on, here's the number of people, and here's the findings, kind of thing, the percentages who experienced it, and so on. And I mentioned that because it was done by everyone else was MDs, and Kevin's a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
All the MDs who were involved, they wanted, and they recommended at the end that it be in the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical
Yeah.
Manual. He like strongly disagreed as a psychologist. I also disagree.
Yeah. Got it. Got it. So let's go into some of the treatment and dealing with, and I know we touched on that a little bit, but so I like to use, examples. I battle imposter syndrome tremendously in everything I do. I feel that way. Now, everything you've said so far rings true. I can probably understand why. The self-talk, the reaction to negative stimuli, or pain points, all the things. Like I probably check every box. I work on it. Now I chalk it up to anxiety, some sort of kind of depressive state as a result of not living the way I feel like I should. And then that translates over to how I feel walking into this studio and doing a podcast. I'm not a podcaster. I'm not as smart as Joe Rogan. I'm going to sound like an idiot to Dr. Young. And just that's the voice in my head constantly. and I work on that and I battle that all the time. So talk to me about that.
Fix him, Dr. Young.
Fix it.
That's why you're really here.
Yeah. No, I mean, just I like to provide a very organic, example, just so we can kind of touch on how to treat and look at. Yeah.
Yeah, interestingly, there was a study out of the University of Vienna that found that people who had low self-compassion for how they spoke to themselves, not surprisingly, had higher levels of imposter feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So, in some ways we're talking basic cognitive behavioral therapy of changing your thoughts first, then changing your behaviors to act like someone who believed the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, the feelings will catch up. What I'm trying to, and I think that's important, because what everybody wants, whether it's reading a book or attending a workshop, they want to walk in feeling like an imposter and leave not feeling like an imposter.
Right.
And that's when I have to break it to them. That's not how it works, right?
Yeah.
Feelings are the
That
last.
feeds imposter syndrome.
Exactly. Because then they go like, oh, I must be a hopeless case, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're not
I've
going to
been here
get
for
better
an
today,
hour.
Robbie. Sorry.
Yep.
It's funny because people come up, I used to give people 10 things they could do. Now I give them 3. I keep it simple. Used to give them 10 things, and they go, well, this is great, but is there anything else we can do? And I would say, of the 10 things I gave you, what have you tried? They said, well, nothing. Was there anything else?
Yeah, I don't really like those.
And truly, it took me decades. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what could, in the evaluation, that would be the one thing that they would say, I wish she told us more things we could do. And I think, well, maybe 20, maybe 80. Like, what's a good number? And that's when it hit me that truly what they wanted was to walk in feeling this way and walk out not feeling that way. So now, even though I said it before, I am much more explicit now that is not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter.
Yeah.
So back to self-compassion, walking in the door, doing a podcast, a different voice could be, I've never done a podcast before. Boy, this is going to be a real great learning experience. The more I do anything, the better I'll get.
Yeah. Not I'm going to suck or I'm going to be embarrassed, but I'm new at this. This will be interesting.
And if I suck and I stumble, it's like, to be able to let it roll off you more quickly.
Yeah.
And be able to laugh at it and kind of just move on more quickly.
Yeah. And that example for me, just to clarify, was very much in the beginning and less now. I do walk in with a lot more confidence now, but to your point, or to the point of one of my questions early on was, does it kind of decrease over time as you gain more experience, gain more wisdom on what you're doing? And that's been my experience, is the more I do something, the less I feel like an imposter.
But the tricky part with that, if that's what you're depending on, Robbie, is you're going to have another experience where you're not going to know what you're doing.
Sure.
That's going to be new. And then you're going to be back in the cycle. But if you kind of break the cycle to begin with, to go back to, I'm going to use the term to think like a humble realist, then you come into it with a completely different mindset.
Yeah.
There's this guy in my town. He was on the town council for 12 years. He ran for re-election and he lost. You're disappointed, maybe embarrassed. I don't know what he felt, but you would assume he didn't feel great.
Mm.
The very next day, he went to Boston and he took out papers to run for state office. And the quote in the paper was, he said it was the next natural step. And I remember thinking, that's not intuitive to me. That the next natural step following a setback is to shoot higher.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, but why not? Why wouldn't he? He's perfectly capable of running. He's been in office for 12 years on a local level. Why couldn't he? But that's what I mean by kind of reframing our thinking. People who are humble realists, what I mean by that is they are genuinely humble, but they have never experienced imposter feelings. They really don't know what I'm talking about when I bring it up. They're no more intelligent, capable, competent than the rest of us. It's just in the exact same situation where we might have imposter feelings, they're thinking different thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a pep talk. It's like, you got this and you can do it and you deserve to be here, which is true, but it's not going to move the needle in any lasting way. They think differently about what it means to be competent. They have a realistic understanding of competence. They have a healthy response to failure, mistakes, setbacks, and constructive criticism, which when you have imposter feelings wounds us deeply. anything that's, critical, like it proof we must be an imposter.
Yeah.
And they also understand that a certain amount of fear and self-doubt are part of the achievement journey.
Yeah.
Which is important because I hear people who feel like imposters, the fact that they even have imposter feelings proves they must be an imposter.
Right.
Right? Because they think if I was really competent, I'd be confident all the time. And my message is like, good luck with that.
Yeah. This reminds me, I mean, to me, this sounds like you have to make like a whole context shift of like how you look at look at yourself and your mind. And it makes me think about like mindfulness practices and acceptance and commitment therapy and like how it's, less cognitive and more a context shift. I don't know, it just makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And I understand that like the educational side of how important that is and how that kind of has to be how it's taught. You kind of have to unlearn how you think to change the way you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And I think schools can really help there. Or, I mean, think about when someone coming up on stage to give a speech and they read all the glorious things about this person and their background and how prestigious it is. No one says they got fired from their first job. They didn't get into their top 5 college choices. They flunked algebra, I mean,
Right.
so we kind of project this notion that success is like this when in fact success is like this.
As we talk about it in that light, it is very societal. It is very American to think that way. We just have these people that we look at and we're constantly, holding up on these pedestals and ooh, I could be like that, or I should be like that, or that's the American dream, or I want the big house, or I want it just constantly. I need more, want more,
More.
should be more.
Yeah, and
Man.
social media isn't helping that.
No,
right?
good Lord, no.
Everyone suddenly is living their best life simultaneously.
Right.
Right.
Because we can now take pictures of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it kind of, I think, not maybe intentionally, but I think it kind of makes it look easy if you're not sharing it. I would urge your listeners to Google Princeton professor failure CV. He has his clearly very impressive Princeton tenure professor CV, but he also posted his failure CV.
Oh,
the
wow.
Journals that rejected him, the jobs he didn't get, he went through the whole list. And it kind of rocked the academic world because, again, we only present one side of the story. We don't present the inevitable kind of ups and downs. We don't prepare doctoral students going in that says you are in a culture of critique. No one is going to write in the margins, well-crafted paragraph, interesting analysis. They're only going to tell you what you did wrong. And if no one informs you of that, you think it's you. So I think there's a lot of re-education to your point, Robbie, that needs to happen. I mean, changing mindset and context and awareness.
God, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool. That,
so we actually tell the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
What a novel thing.
We don't live a life of just fluff.
It's hard if you're a parent, right? Because you want your kid to do well.
Sure.
Your kid is capable of doing more. I think it's called low effort syndrome. You can look it up. Maybe somebody just made that up. But, this kid who is bright and capable, but they steadfastly refuse to apply themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And unconsciously, what might be happening is I'd rather my parents, the teachers, everyone think I'm lazy than stupid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? Because if I try and I fail, then they'll know. But from a parent's point of view, there's a good book I recommend I think it's called The Gift of Failure. Mm-hmm. And it's aimed at parents by a parent. And as a parent, everything in you wants to say this to your kid. And here's why you need to say this.
Yeah, this is how it's going to mess them up.
Right. Yeah. Do you know Dr. Lisa D'Amour? Do you know that? Yeah, she's a parenting everything in the parenting world, and she's written a few books, and she was actually on last week for the second time, and she it's fascinating to talk to her about this kind of stuff because it kind of to your point, it falls into this like balance. It's never way over here. It's like, well, what if this happens? Well, then you kind of try to bring it back here. Well, what if that happens? Well, bring it back to about right here. So it's just this constant like way that you talk and just you're kind of just trying to facilitate, keep them within the guardrails, throughout.
Right. I mean, Carol Dweck, there was a wonderful example she used in her book Mindset, which was the typical dinner time conversation with kids is, what did you learn in school today?
Mm-hmm.
To which they say, nothing, right?
Mhm.
Or I don't remember, which is what we said, I'm quite sure.
Exactly.
And she said, wouldn't it be more useful to say, let's all go around the table and talk about something that we struggled with, or we failed at, or was hard or challenging, and how we handle it? I'll start.
Mm.
So to even like once a week kind of model that for kids about overcoming adversity and being resilient, I think is really important.
Yeah, we had who was it? I think Emily Fletcher that was talking about Bud Rose Thorn. It's like an
Yeah, Bud
exercise that
Rose
she
Thorn.
does with her kids, where one thing you struggled with, one thing you're working on, and one thing that was, or one thing you made progress with, and one thing that went really well throughout the day. I thought that
Look
was
forward to
yeah, I
Bud
thought
Rose
that
Thorn.
was really cool.
Yeah, great practice. All right, Dr. Young, I know we're getting towards the end. Let's do one quick kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it promotion, but how can our listeners, if just people's lights are going off listening to this, where can they go? Website, something to read. I know you mentioned a few things, but let's list off maybe 2 or 3 things that our listeners can do if this is all ringing true for them.
ImpostorSyndrome.com, they can go there. I've made available as a free download the most widely shared and frankly plagiarized part of my work, which is these kind of 5 types of quote unquote types of imposter syndrome: the perfectionist, the expert, natural genius, soloist, and the superhuman. Different manifestations of how we exaggerate and measure our competence. That's free. They can go get that. There's other resources, books and articles at impostorsyndrome.com. And we have a training coming up called the Imposter Syndrome Informed Coach, which is not just for coaches, it's for anybody who works directly with individuals, might be a faculty advisor or a mentor, so that they can be more informed as they're working with people, because there's so much nonsense out on the internet right now about imposter syndrome that we want to bring some more, again, informed awareness to the topic. And then how can you coach someone to make that shift to humble realist?
Nice.
Got it. Do you, just a side question, do you all work with organizations? Would you come into I mean, it seems like this would be such a valuable content and topic for like a medical school.
Yeah, I've probably spoken at least 10 medical schools.
Okay, good. So yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken.
I didn't come up with that idea. All right.
Yeah, no, I've spoken at 100 universities around the world. It's a huge issue in STEM. It's a big issue in doctoral programs, medical schools, and I do a lot of work with major corporations and big law firms as well. I mean, it's rampant. I mean, here's the thing. If 80% of people feel this way, that means we're in the majority, right? Like the point I made in my chapter that I mentioned to you is like, why aren't we studying that minority within the minority who are humble but haven't had these feelings? To me, the clues are there.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing or thinking differently that other people can learn from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. One final question. Little bit of a thinker. Dr. Valerie Young, why do you care so much?
Oh, how do you not? I think because everybody loses when bright people play small. I see the impact, whether it's burnout, whether it's flying under the radar. There are behaviors associated with imposter syndrome that have costs and consequences for individuals, for organizations, and I think for society.
Well, Dr. Young, you are doing incredible work. Like you said, 80% plus are dealing with this. Thank you so much for all you do.
Yeah, thanks for dedicating your career to this. What you just said in that last question really makes a lot of sense to me. I can't imagine how much lost potential has been, gone down the drain because of the self-doubt and everything else that has to do with this. So I appreciate your work.
Thank you. That means a lot to me hearing that from you.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. The information and opinions shared on this podcast are solely those of the host and guests and are not a substitute for medical advice. If you feel like you may need professional help, here are some resources. Visit Patrick Balsley's practice, sanacounseling.com, Robbie Shaw's practice, eventiderecovery.com, or visit theblanchardinstitute.com.